The flicker of candlelight cast long, trembling shadows across Grace James's modest dining room. The table was set for 4, each plate perfectly arranged, silverware polished, glasses gleaming. A small cake sat at the center, its frosting decorated with "Happy 65th Birthday, Mom," written in careful, store-bought swirls. The candles burned patiently, waiting for a breath that never came. Grace sat at the head of the table, her back straight but her eyes heavy with the weight of silence. She glanced at the empty chairs, one for Spencer, one for Dillon, one for Coop. Once this table had overflowed with laughter, arguments, and the clinking of plates as her children passed food around, teasing one another while she tried to keep order. Tonight, the chairs were nothing but cold wooden reminders of a life that had moved on without her. She checked her phone again. No new messages. The last text from Spencer was 2 days old, a rushed, "Busy with practice, love you." Dillon had left a voicemail last week, promising to call soon. Coop hadn't checked in at all, though Grace knew her goddaughter's music career was taking off faster than anyone could have imagined. She told herself they weren't bad kids, they were just busy. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the ache. 65 years, she whispered into the silence, her voice carrying a tremor. And this is what it feels like to grow old. She picked up her fork and cut into the cake. The sweetness was almost bitter on her tongue, eaten not with joy but with resignation. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall grew louder with every passing second, echoing the rhythm of her loneliness. Her mind drifted back to her younger years, working double shifts, scraping by, sacrificing everything so Spencer and Dillon could dream bigger than she ever had. She remembered Coop showing up on her doorstep as a troubled teenager, and how quickly she'd embraced her as one of her own. She had been their rock, their foundation, their unwavering support. And now, she was a woman with more memories than company, surrounded by echoes of the past. A sudden gust rattled the window, and Grace shivered, drawing her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. She stared at the unlit corner of the room where old family photos hung. There was Spencer in his Crenshaw jersey, Dillon at his first art show, Coop beaming with headphones around her neck. Smiling faces frozen in time, proof that once she had been at the center of their worlds. Tonight, though, she was just a forgotten mother with a half-eaten cake and unanswered questions. Grace blew out the candles herself, watching the smoke curl upward. She closed her eyes for a moment, making a silent wish. Not for wealth, not for health, not even for herself. Only that her children might remember who they were and where they came from before it was too late. When the last wisp of smoke disappeared, the house fell back into silence. But somewhere in her heart, Grace knew this silence would not last forever. The house was quiet now, too quiet. Grace James sat alone in the living room, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the night. The cake from earlier was tucked away in the fridge, the table cleared, as if her lonely celebration had never happened. Still, she couldn't shake the heaviness pressing against her chest. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the family photos scattered across the mantel. Smiling faces frozen in time, Spencer in his Beverly jersey, Dillon grinning with paint-stained hands, Coop laughing wide, headphones slung around her neck. Grace reached out and touched the glass of one frame, her fingers trembling slightly. She whispered, almost to herself, "If I don't say this now, maybe they'll never know." After a long pause, Grace pulled her old laptop from the side table. She hadn't used it much in years, but tonight it would serve a purpose far greater than emails or bills. She opened the webcam, adjusted her posture, and hit record. Her reflection stared back at her. Tired eyes, streaks of gray in her hair, lines that told the story of a life lived for others. For a moment she hesitated. This was not the kind of secret you simply spoke into the void. But her children deserved the truth, even if they didn't hear it until she was gone. "Spencer, Dillon, Coop," she began, her voice soft but steady. "If you're watching this, then I need you to listen carefully. There's something I've kept from you all, something I thought I'd carry with me to the grave." She paused, drawing in a breath as though she could feel Billy Baker's shadow in the room with her. "Years ago, after Billy passed, I found out he left behind more than memories. He left a fortune, hidden in a trust no one knew about, money he never wanted the world, or even his own kids, to discover. And somehow, it ended up in my hands." Her eyes glistened as she leaned closer to the camera. "I didn't spend it. Not a single dollar. I could have, Lord knows I struggled enough. But I couldn't." That money wasn't meant to fix bills or buy comfort. It was meant for you. For all of you. Grace's voice cracked, but she pressed on. But here's the truth. You don't get to claim it unless you earn it. Unless you can stand together as a family, the way I raised you to be. Because money won't heal what's broken between you. Only you can do that. She let the silence hang for a moment, the weight of her words filling the room. Then she reached forward, hand trembling slightly, and stopped the recording. Closing the laptop, Grace exhaled deeply. The secret was no longer hers alone. It was alive, captured in digital form, waiting for the right time to be revealed. Upstairs, as she slipped into bed, she felt both lighter and heavier. She had given her children a gift, but also a test. And though she didn't know when they would see it, she knew this message would change everything. The following morning, the house felt heavy with the weight of the previous night's confession. Grace stood in her kitchen, a mug of coffee growing cold in her hands, her mind replaying the words she had recorded. Had she said enough? Had she gone too far? There was no undoing it now. She sat back at the table, the same one where her lonely birthday cake had burned down its candles, and opened her laptop once more. She pressed play, listening to her own voice echo through the speakers. The words sounded even harsher in the daylight. You don't get to claim it unless you earn it. Grace frowned, shaking her head. Something was missing. This wasn't just about the money. If Spencer, Dillon, and Coop were going to inherit anything, it had to be more than cash sitting in some trust fund. It had to mean something. She hit record again. Her reflection stared back, tired, worn, but determined. If you've made it this far in the message, she began, her voice firmer now, then you need to understand what I'm asking of you. Billy's fortune, it doesn't belong to people who can't even sit at the same table. It doesn't belong to children who run from one another when things get hard. It belongs to a family. And right now, you are not acting like one. She leaned forward, her eyes burning with the fire of a mother who had given everything and received silence in return. So here's the deal. If you want access to the trust, you will have to come together, not just for a weekend, not just for appearances. You will have to prove that you can forgive each other, that you can support one another the way I once supported you. If you can't, then the money stays locked away forever. Her lips trembled, but she pressed on. This isn't about wealth. It's about loyalty, about love, about remembering where you came from. If you think you can divide this inheritance and claim it separately, you're wrong. It's all or nothing, family or nothing. Grace stopped the recording, but for a moment, she couldn't move. The ultimatum hung in the air, harsher than she had intended, but truer than anything she had ever spoken. She closed the laptop slowly, almost reverently, as though sealing her will. The message was no longer just a confession. It was a challenge. In her heart, she hoped her children would rise to it, that this ultimatum would force them back into one another's lives. But a sliver of doubt lingered. What if it drove them further apart? What if the money poisoned them before it ever saved them? Grace sighed, setting her cold coffee aside. She had planted the seed. Now she could only wait to see what would grow from it, unity or ruin. The night was still, the kind of silence that wrapped Crenshaw in a blanket of uneasy calm. Grace had gone to bed hours earlier, her message locked inside her old laptop like a time bomb waiting to detonate. But she wasn't the only one in the house that week. Grace had asked Layla Keating to stop by earlier that day under the guise of helping with some music for the church fundraiser. Layla, ever polite, had stayed behind when Grace retired upstairs, tinkering with her phone in the living room. That was when she noticed the glow of the laptop sitting on the dining room table. She hadn't meant to pry, at least not at first, but curiosity was Lila's greatest weakness. Grace wasn't exactly the type to leave her computer on overnight, especially not with the webcam still active. Something about it pulled Layla closer. She sat down cautiously, her manicured fingers hovering over the mousepad. Just a peek, she whispered to herself, half smiling at the thought of Grace's disapproving frown if she got caught. One click opened the video library. There it was, a file, timestamped just hours earlier. Its title was Plain Message, but Lila felt a chill sweep through her chest. Against her better judgment, she pressed play. Grace's face filled the screen. Her voice was steady but heavy, carrying the weight of a lifetime of sacrifice. Lila's eyes widened as she listened. Billy Baker. A hidden trust. A fortune no one knew existed. And then, the ultimatum. Spencer, Dillon, and Coop would only inherit if they stood together. Lila sat back, stunned. A million thoughts raced through her mind. The James family had no idea. Spencer had no idea. For years, she had been caught between wanting him and watching him drift further away, pulled by football, pulled by his family. Now she had leverage, but with leverage came temptation. She pressed pause, staring at Grace's frozen face on the screen. This wasn't just money, it was power. The kind of power that could change lives, shift relationships, rewrite loyalties. If Spencer ever found out that she had known before him, would he see it as betrayal or proof that she was destined to stand beside him, guarding his family's future? Her heart pounded as she shut the laptop quickly, almost as if Grace herself might walk down the stairs at any moment. She gathered her purse, her hands trembling, and left the house quietly, the video replaying over and over in her mind. Outside, the cool night air did little to steady her. Layla wasn't sure what she would do with this knowledge. Share it? Hide it? Use it? But one thing was clear. Grace's secret was no longer safe. And in the silence of Crenshaw's streets, Layla Keating walked away carrying the first betrayal. The news had spread like wildfire. Grace's secret, whispered and amplified by curiosity and speculation, reached Spencer first. A friend from football practice had mentioned it casually. "Hey, did you hear about your mom? Something about a hidden trust." Spencer's heart skipped. He hadn't wanted to think about money. Not like this, but the words settled in his mind, igniting something he hadn't expected. A mixture of guilt, fear, and an undeniable pull to return home. Dillon heard similar murmurs at his art gallery, where a staffer jokingly mentioned the James fortune and the family drama surrounding it. Coop found out through social media gossip threads, fans tagging her in cryptic comments about the family money. By the following morning, the siblings were all en route to Crenshaw, not in unity, but each with their own motives. Spencer drove in silence, gripping the steering wheel as memories of his mother's solitary birthday pressed heavily on him. Dillon's thoughts were sharper, more calculating. He wasn't sure if he wanted to reconcile or stake his claim first. Coop, headphones slung around her neck, tapped her fingers impatiently, the excitement in her eyes masking the resentment she had carried for years. When they arrived, the house was just as Grace had left it, quiet, familiar, yet shadowed by absence. The front door opened slowly, and there she was, standing in the hallway, framed by the morning light streaming in through the glass panes. "Mom," Spencer began, his voice tight, laden with guilt. Grace looked at him, and then at Dillon and Coop. Her eyes were tired, but not empty. They held the patience and pain of decades, and a quiet challenge that made the air between them electric. "Sit down," she said softly, gesturing toward the living room. "All of you." The first minutes were awkward, filled with stilted conversation and uneasy glances. Dillon shifted in his seat, irritation creeping into his tone. "We heard about the money," he said carefully. "Is it true?" Grace didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let the question hang like a knife in the air. Spencer opened his mouth, then closed it again, unsure whether to speak first or apologize. Coop leaned forward, crossing her arms, a small smirk hiding a mix of curiosity and frustration. "Money isn't what brought you here," Grace said finally, her voice steady, though edged with sorrow. "You came back because you heard whispers, because you thought there was something to gain. And yet, here you are, together. That's a start." The room fell silent, tension coiled in every glance, every movement. Old wounds flared, arguments over broken promises, years of absence, and unspoken disappointments. Yet beneath it all, Grace's presence grounded them. She didn't scold, she didn't plead, she simply reminded them who they were. Outside, the sunlight grew stronger, streaming into the living room and illuminating the tense faces of the three siblings. Something unspoken had shifted. They had returned, yes, but whether for family or fortune, only time would reveal. And Grace, watching them, knew this was exactly how her plan had to begin. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Grace James's living room as Laura Baker stepped through the door, her heels clicking softly against the polished wooden floor. She carried herself with the poised confidence of someone used to being listened to, yet beneath it all was a flicker of worry that had grown heavier with every passing day. "Grace," Laura began, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk." Grace looked up from the dining table, where she had been quietly reviewing some old family albums, her laptop closed beside her. "Laura," she said, a tired smile flickering across her face. "You always seem to show up when the world feels too heavy." Laura's eyes didn't waver. "It's worse than heavy this time. It's dangerous." Grace raised an eyebrow, curiosity tinged with caution. "Dangerous? How so?" Laura took a deep breath, lowering herself into the armchair across from Grace. "I've been digging. About Billy's trust, the hidden fortune you found. I know you've been careful, but Grace, there are things you don't understand. Things Billy buried years ago. Corruption, payoffs, booster scandals, questionable coaching contracts. Exposing this could ignite a firestorm bigger than anyone realizes." Grace felt a shiver crawl up her spine. She had suspected that Billy's wealth wasn't clean, but she had buried her doubts to protect her children, to honor her promise of keeping the trust intact until they were ready. "I've protected it all these years," she said softly. "I never touched a penny. I only wanted to ensure it went to them when they were ready." Laura leaned forward, voice lowering to a tense whisper. "And now, with the message out and the children coming back, everything is exposed. Even whispers of this trust are spreading. You could lose control before the test even begins. And if someone unscrupulous, someone who knows about Billy's dealings, gets involved, you could be putting the entire family at risk." Grace's hands tightened into fists. She had anticipated greed, yes, and perhaps jealousy, but she hadn't fully considered the shadows lurking in the past. People who had benefited from Billy's secrets could emerge at any moment, threatening not just her children, but her carefully guarded legacy. Laura paused, letting her words sink in. "Grace, I'm warning you. Be cautious. Don't just watch the family scramble for the inheritance. Watch the people outside it too. Secrets this deep, they don't stay buried forever." For a long moment, silence filled the room, heavier than any birthday cake or empty chair. Grace leaned back, her eyes distant, thinking of Spencer, Dillon, and Coop. Could they truly navigate this without being corrupted? Could they even survive it if the wrong person discovered the truth first? Finally, Grace exhaled, a mixture of resolve and fear in her breath. "I've given them a test, Laura. But now, it seems I'll need to give myself one too, to protect them from everything I never imagined." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, as though echoing the warnings Laura had spoken. Grace knew that the storm was only beginning, and that the coming days could either mend her family or destroy them entirely. The house that had once been a sanctuary for the James family now felt like a battlefield. Tension clung to every corner, every shadow, thick and suffocating. Spencer, Dillon, and Coop circled each other warily in the living room, the echoes of old grievances rising as quickly as the rumors of Billy Baker's hidden fortune. Spencer was the first to speak, his voice sharp, tinged with frustration. "So, let me get this straight. We're supposed to suddenly act like a family, just because Mom left us some money?" His gaze flicked toward Dillon, who folded his arms defensively, lips pressed in a thin line. "You're missing the point," Dillon shot back. "It's not just money. Mom's test isn't about wealth. It's about proving we can work together. Something I'm not sure you're capable of." Coop, ever the wild card, leaned back against the doorway, smirking despite the tension. "And here I thought I was the outcast," she said lightly, though her eyes burned with determination. "Guess I get to play the schemer too, huh?" Spencer glared at her. "This isn't a game, Coop. This is serious." "Everything about this family is serious, Spence," she shot back. "But don't act like you're innocent either. You're just as selfish as Dillon, and I don't trust either of you to play nice long enough to see the inheritance through." The words hung in the air like sparks waiting to ignite. Old wounds resurfaced. Spencer recalling Dillon taking credit for his accomplishments, Dillon remembering Spencer ignoring their mother's loneliness, and Coop nursing the resentment of years spent feeling like an outsider. Then came the unspoken tension about Layla. Spencer's face tightened at the thought that she had discovered the secret before them. Dillon's jaw clenched, anger flickering at how favoritism and secrecy had shaped their lives. And Coop, ever perceptive, sensed the silent rift widening like a crack in the floorboards. Plans and counterplans began forming in whispers and glances. Dillon suggested subtle strategies, ensuring he would get credit for any reconciliation. Spencer wanted to dominate every interaction, to prove loyalty through leadership. Coop, meanwhile, played both sides, watching and waiting, deciding when and how to intervene to her advantage. Grace watched silently from the doorway, her heart heavy but resolute. This was the stage she had prepared. The children would clash, test themselves, and reveal the depths of their character. And only by surviving the conflict, by navigating the war of hearts and minds, could they ever reach the truth about Billy Baker's fortune. As arguments escalated and alliances shifted, the living room became less of a home and more of a proving ground. Old love, old grudges, and new ambitions collided violently. Outside, the wind howled through Crenshaw's streets, echoing the storm brewing inside. Grace knew it now. The family test she had designed was no longer about instructions or ultimatums. It had become war, and in war, only the clever, the loyal, and the strong would survive. Jordan Baker had always moved in shadows, a master of calculated observation. He had been aware of his father Billy's dealings long before anyone else. Contracts, payoffs, and favors whispered behind closed doors. But the existence of the hidden trust had remained a mystery, locked away by Grace James's careful guardianship. But rumors had a way of leaking, and Jordan's network of contacts had picked up on the whispers long before the James children had even returned home. At first, he had been content to watch from the sidelines, letting curiosity simmer and the tension within the family build. But when he confirmed the truth, Billy's fortune intertwined with Grace's family test, something dark shifted inside him. He sat in his sleek office overlooking Crenshaw, a half-empty cup of espresso forgotten at his side. Jordan's fingers tapped rhythmically against the mahogany desk as he replayed the fragmented pieces of information he had collected. Grace's recording had been mentioned in a discreet conversation by one of Layla's friends. Someone had leaked just enough for him to know it existed. "This changes everything," he muttered to himself, leaning back in his chair. He had watched Spencer, Dillon, and Coop chase after their mother, tensions erupting in predictable bursts of anger, jealousy, and fragile alliances. But if he played his cards right, Jordan realized he could position himself at the center of it all, controlling the inheritance, steering the family's fragile unity, or exploiting their weaknesses. He picked up his phone and sent a single cryptic message to an old confidant. "The James test begins. Make sure nothing goes unnoticed." Meanwhile, at the James residence, Grace continued to observe her children's squabbles with quiet concern. What she didn't know was that Jordan was already moving in, watching every misstep and noting every fracture. The siblings, wrapped in their own power plays and petty betrayals, had no idea an outside force was infiltrating their war. Jordan's mind raced as he considered the possibilities. He could reveal himself openly, using authority and intimidation to bend the family to his will. Or he could manipulate events subtly, allowing the siblings to destroy themselves while he waited in the wings to claim what he believed was owed to him. Outside, the afternoon sun dipped low, casting long, sinister shadows across the streets of Crenshaw. Jordan's gaze followed the path of his mother's old home, where the James children argued and schemed, oblivious to the silent predator observing them. He smiled faintly, a cold, calculating smile. Grace's secret had sparked a war she could barely control, but Jordan Baker was ready to turn that war into his advantage. The hidden enemy had arrived, and the stakes were about to rise higher than anyone could anticipate. The house was eerily quiet that evening. Shadows stretched across the walls, elongating the familiar corners of Grace James's living room into something foreign and threatening. Spencer, Dillon, and Coop had been arguing for hours, their voices echoing through the halls like a storm bouncing off the walls. Yet when they finally paused to catch their breath, Grace was nowhere to be found. At first, they assumed she had gone upstairs, perhaps to rest after the tension of the day. But when they checked every room, the closet, even the garage, the truth sank in. She was gone. "Mom?" Spencer's voice cracked, a mixture of fear and disbelief. Where are you?" Dillon ran to the front door, yanking it open. The street was empty. Coop scanned the backyard, her instincts alert. The gate was locked, the neighbors, houses dark and silent. No sign of her anywhere. Panic began to set in. Spencer's hands shook as he dialed her phone, only to hear the sterile voice of voicemail. Dillon checked her laptop on the dining table, the device still open from earlier. But the file, the secret recording, was gone. The cursor blinked on a blank screen. It was as if Grace had vanished, leaving not a trace behind. Who could have done this? Coop whispered, her voice tense. Who would? Her words trailed off, fear and uncertainty intertwining. The siblings exchanged frantic glances. The arguments, the grudges, the petty schemes, all of it suddenly felt meaningless compared to the immediate threat, their mother's safety. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it an unsettling chill. It seemed almost deliberate, as if nature itself had become complicit in Grace's disappearance. Spencer grabbed the car keys. "We need to call the police. Now." Dillon shook his head. "No, not yet. If this is about the trust, if someone wants to scare us or take the inheritance, the police won't help. They'll just complicate things. We need to figure this out ourselves." Coop bit her lip, glancing back at the empty rooms that had once been filled with warmth and life. But what if it's not just someone trying to scare us? What if she's in danger? The realization hit them hard. Grace's disappearance wasn't random. Someone had planned this. The timing, the missing recording, the subtle hints of outside manipulation, it all pointed to a calculated move. The James children were no longer just competitors in a family test. They were pawns in a much larger, more dangerous game. As night fell, the shadows deepened. The house felt colder, emptier than ever. And somewhere, unseen and calculating, the person or people responsible for Grace's disappearance were already moving, watching, waiting. Inside the siblings' minds, one thought echoed relentlessly. Grace had vanished, the trust was at stake, and the battle they thought they understood had become something far more sinister. The storm that had been brewing for weeks had finally arrived. The James house was silent in a way it hadn't been for years. The tension that had clung to every room, every corridor, had reached its peak. Spencer, Dillon, and Coop gathered in the living room, their faces pale, their eyes scanning the empty house. Grace's disappearance had cast a shadow over them that no argument or rivalry could pierce. Then, the sound of the front door clicking open made them jump. It wasn't Grace, but someone they knew. Laura Baker stepped in, carrying a manila envelope that seemed heavier than its contents. She laid it on the coffee table with deliberate care. "I found this hidden among her files," Laura said quietly, her eyes steady, betraying neither fear nor relief. "Grace left it for you, for all of you, and perhaps for anyone who needs to know the truth." Spencer reached for the envelope with trembling hands, Dillon hovering, and Coop leaning in curiously. Inside, they found a stack of documents, meticulously organized and labeled. At the top was a letter in Grace's familiar handwriting. "The fortune you seek is not money." Billy left behind confessions, evidence of decades of corruption in South Crenshaw and Beverly Hills football. Bribes, payoffs, illegal contracts, all of it. "The inheritance is the truth. Use it wisely, or it will destroy you and everything you love." The room went silent. Spencer read aloud passages detailing names, dates, and transactions. Dillon's hands shook as he flipped through pages that exposed not just coaches and boosters, but politicians, parents, and influential figures who had benefited from decades of deceit. Coop's eyes widened as she realized the depth of the betrayal that had shaped their city and their own family's history. It's all here," Dillon whispered. "All of it. This could ruin lives." Spencer's jaw tightened. "But Mom, she wanted us to see it, to handle it responsibly. This is her real inheritance, not money. Truth." Coop leaned back, processing, a mixture of awe and fear in her eyes. "And whoever controls this can either make things right or burn everything down." Just then, the front door opened again. Grace entered quietly, her presence commanding attention without a word. She looked at her children, seeing not just the fear and shock, but a flicker of understanding dawning in their eyes. "This," she said softly, gesturing to the documents, "was never about money. It was about legacy, about honesty, courage, and the choices you make when faced with power. Now it's yours. Handle it wisely or lose it all." For the first time in weeks, the James children felt a flicker of unity, not from wealth, but from purpose. Together they had been tested, and now the true challenge lay ahead. Navigating the dangerous truth their father had hidden, protecting their family, and deciding what kind of legacy they would leave behind. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the neighborhood. Crenshaw had survived decades of deceit, but now, in the hands of Grace's children, there was a chance for redemption, for justice, for healing. The hidden fortune had revealed its secret, and for the first time in a long time, the James family faced the future, not divided by greed, but united by truth.